in your view, how are current tariffs impacting material costs and more specifically, construction contracts across the industry?
The first thing I would say is proactively, we need to make sure that when you're setting up your contracts, that you have fairly accounted for that risk. And that could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. If somebody had struck pandemics from the boilerplate of events that would entitle me to reasonable delay, I don't know that I would have died on that issue. But we've learned our lesson the hard way. You should be dying on that issue now because we've seen that could indeed be very disruptive. Similarly,
Did you know that tariffs and trade restrictions have driven construction material costs up by nearly 40% in just the past few years? For civil engineers, that kind of volatility doesn't just stretch budgets, it reshapes entire projects and ramps up risk. In this episode, I'm joined by Josh Levy, co-founder and CEO of Document Crunch, to talk about how these economic shifts are disrupting the construction industry and why escalation clauses are more important than ever, and how technology is transforming contract management. If you want to stay ahead in the high-stakes, fast-changing market, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. I'm your host, James Taylor, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast, the industry's leading show for civil engineering professionals, ranked as the #1 civil engineering podcast by FeedSpot. It's now time for our Civil Engineering Conversation of the Week with Josh Levy. Josh, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Josh, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, what led you to co-found Document Crunch, and how your background in construction law helped shape that platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So even before being a construction lawyer, I've been in this industry for a long time. So I was a construction management major in undergrad school. I went to the University of Florida, go Gators. And, I did some internships for some large contractors where the typical track would have been, going into project management upon graduating. I, got to a point where I knew at graduation, I really didn't want to be a project manager. I loved the industry, but I didn't really want to be on a job site every single day. So I went to law school, ended up, that degree ended up being a lottery ticket because I graduated law school in 2010. And in 2010, nobody could get a job during the Great Recession. It was really hard coming out of law school to get a job, except in South Florida, the University of Miami, where I went to school, there was a lot of construction projects that had been built during the boom that were now in litigation. So sure enough, that construction law degree was highly attractive to several law firms in South Florida. And so I ended up in a construction law practice that started with, really litigation. But as time went on, I ended up handling more full service construction related legal matters. So negotiation of contracts, advising project teams as issues arose. 10 years ago, J.E. Dunn Construction brought me in-house. So I moved from South Florida to Atlanta, where I am today, where, not only did I have what you would consider to be like a traditional legal role in the Southeast, where I rose up through the ranks and ended up leading the legal department in the Southeast of J. Dunn's footprint, but also kind of served in an executive, more business function as well there. So anyway, all that adds up to, James, private practice, yes, but certainly once I was in-house, I just couldn't help but note some patterns that I was seeing. One, I was corporate overhead. Construction companies are not in the business of hiring lawyers. In fact, most of them don't have in-house lawyers. And of course, bidding and negotiating and signing contracts is critically important to set yourself and your company up for success. So that was one kind of area that I was thinking about, and seeing kind of the informational disadvantage between companies like J. Dunn that had someone like me in-house versus like a typical trade contractor or, smaller contractor. And I'd seen, the bad results of that in litigation and otherwise, even in my private practice. But more importantly than that, when I was doing all this legal work, I would have almost like a line of people outside my office every single day with a hard hat in one hand, a piece of paper in the other hand. And the truth is that, and they were coming to me because something had happened on the job site and they needed to know what to do. So you have this industry, construction, which is highly dynamic, where I think Procore did a study recently, 50% of projects are finishing over budget or over time, which means that 50% of the time, a stakeholder, a general contractor, a trade contractor, a owner, an architect, a surety, 50% of the time, one or more of those stakeholders is going to have to pay more money for an asset than they thought they would when they signed up and were excited to do construction. And while setting up the contract is super important, I would say most of the risk is not on whether you set up the contract well, whether you paid someone like me a lot of money per hour to negotiate a good contract or a bad contract. It's the fact that people wearing hard hats in the field need to administer that contract, right?
Yeah.
When these things invariably happen, the number one cause of disputes in our industry is a failure of project teams to understand and administrate the contract terms. And when I talk about the contract terms, of course, there's the contract form itself, but then all the contract documents, specifications, schedules for performance, RFIs, change orders.
Right.
These are all part of the ultimate contract. The administration of those documents is critically important and is the number one cause, the lack of awareness and administration of those or compliance with those documents, number one cause of disputes in our industry, which impacts every one of those stakeholders I just talked about. And so it doesn't matter whether you're a big company that has someone like me in-house. It doesn't matter whether you're a small company that doesn't have someone like me in-house. Setting up those contracts and then administering them the right way is the key. And that lack of democratization of knowledge across the entire industry is pervasive. And so I think a lot about our industry, and we'll get to now the vision now. The vision that I have is a construction industry with zero disputes and stronger relationships.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, it's the vision, and it's what we're moving toward at Document Crunch.
Yeah.
And I think a lot about analogizing it to like the safety mission that this industry has gone on. Safety practices are now embedded into every practice and core value across our entire industry. Why is that? Because we decided as an industry that just because we were doing construction and just because construction is inherently unsafe, it doesn't mean that we have to accept just the cost of injuries as a cost of doing business, right? And very similar to that safety movement, behind every dispute is a strained relationship, lost profits, a derailed career. And, you know, just because we once upon a time built buildings without regard to safety, right? I think back like the New York City skyline. I was there recently and someone said, you wouldn't need artificial intelligence to build that skyline. I said, you're right. But you know what else we didn't have to build that skyline? Hard hats for a lot of those buildings. Just because we can build buildings in an inherently safe environment, it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Same thing goes to disputes. And we here are at Document Crunch are here to lead the industry to a new era. We want to drive disputes down to zero. And the question is, how do we do that? Well, that's the mission that we're on today. And we believe that we can empower construction teams to confidently make decisions that reduce risk and drive better outcomes. I can't stop bad things from happening. I can't stop tariffs. I can't stop weather events. I can't stop safety issues. That's not our remit. But our remit is when those things happen, how do we create a system of accountability so that it's very clear who's responsible and who did what to gain entitlement? And if we can do that, we can drive the costs of disputes down to zero for our industry.
I love hearing that vision and mission, and sounds like you guys are off to great starts. And you brought up the word tariffs, which is a hot topic button right now. So in your view, how are current tariffs impacting material costs and more specifically construction contracts across the industry?
Yeah, I mean, we're in kind of an interesting time now because we're in this like reprieve. But the reality is, and we saw this, it's like very analogous to the COVID situation. So because now we understand that there is a high likelihood that tariffs will have some impact on pricing for construction, the first thing I would say is like proactively, you know, we need to make sure that when you're setting up your contracts, that you have fairly accounted for that risk. And that could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But regardless, you know, when I was negotiating contracts 8 or 9 years ago, if somebody had struck pandemics from the boilerplate of like events that would entitle me to reasonable delay, I don't know that I would have died on that issue.
No big deal. Yeah. Now it's a different story.
But we've learned our lesson the hard way. You should be dying on that issue now because we've seen that could indeed be very disruptive. Similarly, you know, you need to ask yourself a hard question, like what is your risk tolerance for changes in pricing that may occur after you've signed the contract? And is it yours to bear or is it somebody else's to bear? And so to that end, I would say that everyone is now aware that we're entering maybe a new world where there is going to be some level of tariffs or cost uncertainty because of geopolitical issues that are going on. But the thing that was really striking to me when those tariffs kind of came up on us very quickly was, what about all the projects right now that were out there where the contract had already been signed
Mhm.
you'd already promised that you were going to deliver the project for $1, and now maybe that dollar costs $1.25 or $1.30. Like, so it's about getting in front of those issues as proactively as you can and making sure that you, to the extent possible, could take all measures to mitigate those risks. So the fact that we've kind of entered this freeze zone has helped us
Yeah.
a little bit. However, it's still critically important that we be mindful that this is an economic reality and that we need to be setting ourselves up for success, either using this reprieve to plan better for contracts that are already underway, or to at least protect yourself proactively for contracts that you may enter into.
I think you said it there, and the key word is being proactive. And I think a lot of times, especially when things are so busy, you become more reactive than proactive. But in these types of things, if you're not being proactive, you set yourself up for failure.
That's exactly right.
So, why is it critical for civil engineers and project managers to audit contracts for price escalation clauses?
Well, I mean, it's that's the whole ball game. So you've got this uncertainty that arises, and you know, my fundamental belief has been when it comes to construction risk, we've got again 50% of projects are finishing over budget or over time, is that the risk should be borne by the party who is best suited to manage that risk. And in this particular case, I think it's arguable that like political uncertainty is, it's a tough thing to assign blame to that. So I think you need to just figure out like where the risk sharing should lie, and it just really depends on where you sit in the supply chain. But I would say that for, our typical customers who are general contractors and trade partners, I do not necessarily believe that 100% of that risk should be borne by those executing the construction,
Right.
because I don't know that they're best equipped to manage that risk versus maybe contingencies should be carried, in the overall project budget for those risks. And so I think that where the contract lands on that is critically important, and at least having the opportunity to assess whether you are in a position to bear that risk is important, because it could be the difference between going out of business or not. And we saw that
Yeah.
during COVID.
Talking about the word risk, what are some strategies that civil engineers can use to mitigate risks and maintain project stability in this economic climate?
Yeah, I think there's two things that you can do. Either you can negotiate more optimal terms that shifts the risk, or if you are going to be the one to bear the risk, you still need to be aware that you have the risk. So I'll give you a perfect example. Once upon a time, I was working on a project, a very tough owner. I was looking at the contract. I went running down the hall to my client and said, "We can't do this project." And the client said, "Why?" I said, "Because we're working in a rainy environment, and they're saying that we get no entitlement for rain. How are we ever going to do this?" And the executive said, "Well, we really need the project for business reasons." So there was a business reason why the executive wanted to take on this risk. And here I was saying, "But we can't manage this risk. We're totally screwed." So what did we do, James? We came to a great compromise to mitigate that risk. We couldn't mitigate that risk through the contract. The client was adamant no negotiation was going to be allowed. So we submitted a schedule and a price that took into account the very high likelihood that there was going to be rain on the project. So we submitted it. Client came back to us and said, "We love you. You're so qualified. You have a great proposal. The issue is that your schedule is 3 weeks longer than everybody else's and what we would expect you would do." And we said, "You're right, because you won't let us get entitlement for rain. Do you want?" And so we're willing to price that up front, or maybe we can share the risk. Maybe it won't rain all 3 weeks and it would accrue to your benefit, but we can't just take all this risk. So what did they
Yeah.
do? They said, "Understood your position. Why don't we share this risk?" And we were able to negotiate accordingly because we took a creative approach to mitigating it. But what does that start with, James? Knowledge. If we just signed the thing without being aware of how big of a risk that was, we could have very well been over the barrel. And that's the difference.
Well, I think you were saying it there of like, okay, as an owner or a client, they're thinking about it one way, right? Hey, I need this done in a certain amount of time. I need to have it. They're not thinking about all the other pieces that might be a part of how do we execute this contract. And if you don't raise that voice up, like you were saying, that knowledge base, they don't understand that. And so the project isn't set up for success from the very beginning. So having that communication, that collaboration helps across the board.
Exactly.
How can industry-wide collaboration help construction professionals navigate economic challenges like tariffs and inflation?
Yeah, so here's the deal. Like, I mean, this is similar to the last discussion we were having.
Mhm.
I don't believe in a shove it down your throat approach to risk, right? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what side, this goes back to the vision, like zero disputes. You can shove all the risk down the other party's throat. But if you shove so much risk down the other party's throat that it causes them indigestion and to fall down, and that causes a project to go off the rails, then even you, as a stakeholder in that project, are going to get sucked into an unsuccessful project, right? And so you think about collaboration, where does that come in? Like, every stakeholder has an interest in a project being finished on time, on
On
budget, and
budget, yeah.
safely.
Yeah.
Every stakeholder. If you're going to throw all of the risk onto another party, then what you're taking the risk of is that party not being able to stomach it at the end of the day in practice, and that causes the project to go off the rails. Collaboration serves to spread some of that risk sharing to keep the project on the rails. And that goes to this whole like stronger relationships thing too, right? It's not just zero disputes. It's that when you have successful projects that finish on time, on budget, and safely, a qualitative question that our industry gets asked a lot is, would you work with the team again? Everybody wants to make it easy to work with the team again on the next project, right? And so I think about collaboration being at the root of that.
So, CEO of Document Crunch, I'm sure you have a lot to share about it, but how can technology like Document Crunch help streamline contract analysis and improve risk identification in today's construction projects?
Yeah, again, I mean, we offer now solutions across the project lifecycle, which empower teams to confidently make informed decisions that reduce risk and get better outcomes, going back to this whole like collaboration, risk sharing strategy. So, we do everything like break down contracts and other documents to very easily understand risks associated with those documents so that you have a roadmap at any given time as to like what you're looking at and getting to the right answer quickly. But also importantly, we've started automating workflows that otherwise maybe teams are going through without having complete knowledge of best practices or how to handle things.
Hmm.
And so that's what we're really doing. Again, just bring that awareness, knowledge, and even automation to start taking some of these workflows or fluid situations in the field or across the project lifecycle, and just making sure that they're handled right. Making sure that before you sign the contract, you have a good understanding of the risk so that you have a chance to mitigate it, push back, whatever. Making sure that before you kick off the project, that the project team has a fundamental knowledge of the business terms that they're going to have to administer so that they're not, doing things every day that are maybe accruing latent risk. So that at the end of the project, they say, well, we were entitled to rain on this project. And you say, that's great. Let me see the notices that were required. And they say, here's a bunch of text messages. And you say, I don't think we're going to get this entitlement anymore. Right. So how do you help that? So to that end, and how do you start automating some of that work? So like we have a notice provision, a notice builder where you can now give a contractually compliant notice using our tool much faster with much more certainty than if a typical project manager were to do this. So we think about our risk reduction platform applying across the project lifecycle to ensure that during all these various workflows or phases of construction, teams are making the right decision across all the documents.
Josh, has been a great conversation with you. What final piece of advice can you offer to civil engineers and construction professionals looking to better manage risk, navigate economic challenges like tariffs, and then also leverage technology like Document Crunch to stay ahead in today's evolving industry?
Yeah, I think two things. One, knowledge is power. So at the root of this fundamental issue of disputes is, again, lack of knowledge by project teams, which I would include at civil engineers and at all stakeholders on, who is responsible and what was done to gain entitlement. That's at the root of all disputes. So you definitely need to bone up on that. And that leads to the second point about technology. The way to bone up on that in the past was to go through a lot of time and pain and heartache to do that. But now there is technology that exists which allows you to get to a point of best practices with much more efficiency and certainty than if left to your own devices. When you can utilize technology to do that, that frees you to spend more time on mitigation strategies or collaboration, less time on just trying to figure out who's responsible and what I do about it. And so we want you doing that more creative work, and we want to get you to like the fundamental position quicker so that you can do more of that creative work.
I love it. I love it, Josh, and thanks so much for sharing and we'll be coming back with our CE Hot Seat segment. All right, now it's time for our CE Hot Seat segment of the week with Josh Levy. Josh, welcome to the hot seat. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right. Do you have any specific rituals that you practice every day? For example, do you have a specific morning ritual or lunchtime ritual, things that you do on a daily basis that contribute to you being a successful professional?
Absolutely. Almost every day, I'm told to rest sometimes. I will start my morning with a workout that usually includes some kind of flexibility. And it also includes either like some kind of cardio strength training or high intensity training. That is absolutely a key to my energy and kind of edge as a founder. And then I would just say one other important thing, James, is I do keep a gratitude journal, and I try and start every morning with just whatever's on my mind as to what I'm grateful for. I think that usually grounds me and just kind of keeps me, in the right headspace, a little bit of perspective.
That positive headspace is important for sure. What is one book that you recommend to engineers regularly, or just one book that you have found to be extremely helpful in your personal or professional development?
Yeah, so there's a book that I've read called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's really kind of a guidebook for founders in the tech space, but I think it applies to a lot of folks. And again, it's just a lot of perspective as to, what it takes to get through really difficult challenges that await on the other side of an entrepreneur's journey.
Thinking back on your managers of the past, picture your favorite manager or managers. What was it that made them your favorite?
Yeah, we talk a lot about this, and we've got a core value at Document Crunch, which is called being lion-hearted. It's our first core value. And so what does that mean? I think about two boundary conditions. Boundary one, and this comes from a manager of mine, actually the person who hired me at Jade on Construction. His name is Colby Cox. He's now the Chief Legal Officer of Gray Construction. But I think this really embodies him, and I've now adopted it as a value of our company. You can see kind of the lions behind me. There's a little bit of a theme there. But on the one hand, you have to be completely authentic and have the courage to be vulnerable with yourself and your team, and have a lot of integrity in how you would give feedback and do things that you say you're going to do, follow through on those things. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, and this is very much key to me, I believe that that's how you build trust, those things that I just talked about. But I believe that you get the best out of people by always honoring your relationships with grace and dignity and compassion. Yeah. So I believe in creating a space where you get the best out of people by being uplifting and bringing them up. So when we talk about being lion-hearted, it's being both. It's having the courage to be both real, authentic, give real talk, give that feedback, follow through, but also having the courage to operate with grace and dignity no matter what.
I've got one final question, and that is the critical civil engineering career elevator advice question. If you got into an elevator with a civil engineering student and had about 30 to 40 seconds with them, what career advice would you share with them?
Get on top of AI quickly so that you can be a leader as you enter the job force.
Josh, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, or you can go to documentcrunch.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Josh. Please remember you can find the show notes for this episode at civilengineeringpodcast.com. There you'll find the summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all your civil engineering endeavors.